Homunculus is one of the few mangas that tries to expose humans to themselves. Through a deep delve into nuances or perhaps the potentially ugly sides of human nature, albeit using interesting and shocking and somewhat violent scenery that plays with your mind and pushes you to read it again and again to grasp the meaning of specific scenes and dialogues. However, you come out of it asking more questions than having answers. And because I enjoyed reading it, I thought I'd share some interesting insights I took from it. But as you know by now, your discretion is advised. As this manga contains a lot of adult themes that might be difficult to read through or perhaps triggering. The manga starts off with an interesting premise, a mind game of sorts, or perhaps a theory of what would it be like to be able to see what people have in the depths of their inner world, their unconscious. Imagine you could develop a capacity by some medical procedure that enhanced your senses in a way that enables you to see or sense the truth about a person's inner works. The manga continues and expands on the implications of such a hypothetical, and by doing that, ends up deconstructing what self is, what being oneself is, and the place of other, in this interesting dialectic between self and other. And while it starts off with the question of who is this other I am seeing, the question quickly shifts into who are you, the one seeing. And it goes back and forth and demands us to doubt what we see and the reality portrayed in front of us. Let's consider this particular scene, where the main character Nakoshi and this other dude, Nabaru, are sitting in a coffee shop. Nakoshi, with his acquired new capacity to see people's subconscious or see in the distortions of the human heart, he is pushed to question what he is seeing. The human eye does not exist solely to reflect the world in front of it. It also reflects the self upon the outside world. As you are watching the homunculi are watching you. The homunculi being the representations that Nakoshi is able to see through his new acquired potential gift. And here I'd have to take a moment to appreciate how Hegelian this is. The dialectical nature of experience is an important element in Hegelian philosophy, marked by this interaction that exists between the internal and external worlds. Essentially, the intrasubjective relation, the relation you have with yourself, conditions the intersubjective relation to other, the relation you have with your external world. And likewise, this very relation to other conditions the self's relation to itself. It's not just a one-way association, but a feedback loop. That is a dynamic process of gazing into each other. As you gaze at the abyss gazes back at you, and then you gaze back at it. But its gaze has changed something in you, and so when you gaze back at it, you gaze at it differently. But in addition to this, Hegel adds that this is a necessary element of being and becoming oneself. Does that make sense? Okay. As I continued reading the manga, a certain idea started to dawn on me. If Nakoshi has developed the capacity to see other people's unconscious, the mangaka wants us to continually doubt it and wonder if what he is seeing is impacted by his own subjectivity, and all we are looking at are his own interpretations that say more about him than about some reality out there. And wouldn't it be impossible to truly see others as they are? Would it be impossible for someone to truly see others completely? And in this case, we go back to that initial hypothetical that the manga started with. And we can realize that even if your senses are heightened and were to be given this power, you wouldn't really be able to see others fully, because other is unattainable. And then this backfires into self, because then it starts to wonder about itself. Am I even attainable to myself? Part 2. There is a link between freedom, recognition, and realization of self. Both philosophers, Hegel and Fichte, link the necessity of reciprocal freedom as a condition for identity, and the importance of other in order to realize oneself and to grow. The realization of freedom is only possible through the presence of other. It is a condition of self-consciousness, of Ihood, Ichheit, to assume that there is an actual rational being outside of oneself. It can thus be proven strictly a priori that a rational being does not become rational in an isolated state, but that at least one individual outside it must be assumed, another individual who elevates this being to freedom. True freedom consists in my identity with the other. I am only truly free when the other is also free and recognized by me as free. From here we understand the concept of reciprocity and how this association with other should ideally be a relationship based on mutual recognition. But since it's my interaction with others that allows me then to know myself, or perhaps to build myself, can I really know myself outside of the influence of other? Isn't other really part of who I am? Other obviously isn't just specific individuals, but also society, its norms, its rules that govern our life. Others, however, just as much as they open me up to realms of freedom, they also limit my freedom. So what does that say about attaining ourselves as the ultimate purpose of individuals? Through the presence of other, I realize that I am a transcendence that has been transcended, that I am my body, and through the other, I fall into the world as an object among other objects.
And obviously, no one wants to be an object. We want to be subjects and turn others into objects.
I think one of the most remarkable parts of this manga is the character of 1775. I think she portrays an interesting aspect of the necessity of other and also how problematic other can be. Her depiction showcases the struggle for recognition and what it is like to be an object, or rather, a sea of symbols. The first time we see 1775 is her being exposed like a living doll or merchandise, portraying this weird advanced level of burosera, which is, you can just Google that. The funny thing is, the objectification of 1775 starts at home, where she is seen as, again, an object, under control, obedience, mechanical association with her family, showcasing how in society you play roles imposed on us, like being the obedient child. But the funny thing that Nabaru points out is that even being rebellious and acting the way she does behind the scenes, it's simply her following another script, another role already structured and very predictable. Which really makes you wonder how original we are in our own life scripts, especially with this girl who desires to be seen and desires attention and really wants to be herself, but ends up being so unoriginal and so predictable. And reading that felt so depressing. On croit choisir librement d'être ce que l'on est, mais on est en fait contraint de jouer un rôle. N'étant pas ce que l'on est, donc de jouer le rôle de ce qu'on est hors de soi. On n'est pas là où l'on est, mais toujours là où l'on n'est que l'acteur de cet autre que l'on est. This conversation ensues between her and Nabaru, where he starts asking her the typical woke question, "Who are you?"
You are not your name, not your social status, not the labels or gender or age.
And after all, she says she is herself. Being me is enough kind of empowerment. I think that's where we usually stop and have a wholesome moment. But the story doesn't stop there.
If all the labels are removed from people like layers of an onion, does that mean they disappear in the end? Is there nothing left? Are you something that was molded and created by the external world? How do I find my true self? The girl asks. And Nabaru says, destroy the pattern of your life. In a way, you have to stop going by the book.
Although that sounds so inspirational, the author shows us how ridiculous that is, as Nabaru himself was chasing this girl following a basic human script. And after this, we have the final dialogue with 1775, which I think is very graphic. This third encounter is with Nakoshi. Their encounter is violent, it's disturbing, yet looks like some kind of exposure therapy of sorts to deal with their unconscious shadow. Well, mostly Nakoshi's unconscious and disturbed reality, to be honest. And the whole scene showcases how 1775 truly is playing her part at being a sea of symbols. As Nakoshi chooses what she means, as it pleases him and fits his narrative. At a moment, I realized that Nakoshi was seeing himself in this girl and was conversing with himself as if he was in the girl's position just as much as he was in his own position. Does that make sense? The violence he was exuding on her was a violence he wanted to act on himself. So what is really going on in this scene? There is obviously a blurriness of what is real, and now we understand that it's a staple in this manga. So before their encounter, we see both characters portrayed to consume themselves, and I will not
go into details about what that means for your own sake.
Suggesting similarity. Similarity of what, though? Similarity of despair? The despair to be human, to feel human. Exploration of human nature. Idiosyncrasies, the ugliness of humans. The things that make us humans are the very things stopping us from transcending ourselves. Deceptiveness, shame, fear, guilt, pride, vanity, promiscuity, greed,
Anger, frustration, loss, love, possessiveness, need for control.
Through other, one identifies aspects of themselves and finds space to accept the vulnerability that comes with being human. From the interaction with the Yakuza man, Nabaru's story, 1775, the homeless personal stories, all these portrayals reminds us of the vulnerability of humans. The feeling of guilt, for example, marks Nakoshi's worldview. Guilt over negating himself, rejecting who he was before he had plastic surgery, and ditching his pregnant girlfriend. guilt over being a banker who destroyed many small companies and businesses, making in time many people homeless and without an income. Guilt over the objectification of women and his objectification of himself. The feeling of guilt was arguably triggered by his first encounter that he had with the Yakuza man. He may be the one who awakened this distant memory and initiated this whole cycle of reckoning for Nakoshi. The need for meaning and its association with narrative is an additional point I really liked about the manga. The story ultimately has this meta-narrative that the purpose of everyone is to know themselves, and everything we do serves to build and actualize who we are, and to simultaneously have this dynamic self be legitimized in the gaze of the other. And so the absence of understanding oneself in our past leads to absence of future, as the manga shows us that through interacting with others, different characters realize aspects of themselves and consequently grow into a better and new, more egocentric version of themselves. But society is still portrayed as the enemy, the above and below. So, do you give up yourself for social recognition, or give up social recognition for the sake of self? The symbolism around the fear of the below is a marking element in Nakoshi's story, and in the manga overall. The traumatic impact of the fear of being in the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of society, the portrayal of what it is like to be at the bottom from the homeless as well. And then we see the complete abandonment of social recognition by Nakoshi and his regression from society altogether, becoming this modern version of Diogenes, except instead of a barrel, he has a car. And yet, we see that that too leads nowhere. Except that Nakoshi still wants recognition. But from who? Recognition of what exactly? We don't really know. And he doesn't really know either. Before denouncing society, Nakoshi was considered a very successful man. He had a good social standing, but the performance he made lacked authenticity. In the surface, he scored at every socioeconomic test, and he had full social recognition. The very stereotypical rich life and the very stereotypical rich man. But he lacked himself. Because in order to become who he is, he had to let go of who he was. And maybe he had let go of something very fundamental. Or maybe he never even had the chance to grow that fundamental thing. But he now clings to this idea that his former self had it better, and now wants to turn things around. Before plastic surgery, before ditching his pregnant girlfriend, he had it all good. But did he really? He was haunted by the feeling of being below everyone. He felt unseen and despised himself. And it's depressing after following his desires, he ends up in the same seat, dissatisfied, unhappy, empty. And we can't just simply blame him. Maybe blame human nature and how society can really be shitty on unattractive people. I know I'm stretching my hat from one thing to the other, but this above and below also felt like an expression of class struggle. especially with the representation of the homeless and their alienation from society, and their struggle for recognition, to be seen and to be human. These aren't like some criminals or crooks. They're simply vulnerable individuals who, because of people like Nakoshi, who work for entities that wants to grow and expand, or because of the ruthless lack of community and support, have lost their jobs and found themselves discarded. And they look up to those buildings, and there Nakoshi is from the above looking down. And now he's right with them, looking up to his old self. Perhaps this distance that we think exists between members of society gives us this illusion that extreme poverty and finding yourself homeless is very comfortably far from you. That finding yourself in a vulnerable social situation doesn't and would never concern you. This me and them, us and them, is what this manga tells us is just an illusion. That those them are humans the same way you are. And perhaps this sentiment of, oh, just ignore them until they disappear or actively remove them from sight only leads to a stagnation of society as a whole. It's pretty much something that I think the manga hints at slightly. The pointlessness of self-seeking as a mode of being, a parody of enlightenment? So, you want to be you. But how do you know who you are? How do we define you? Where is you? Did you make your personality yourself? Do you feel like yourself? Are your feelings genuine? Aren't they affected by, say, the weather? How consistent should you be in your actions and attitudes and behaviors to know that you are actually being yourself? How much do you control about yourself to know that you are choosing to be yourself? If you are similar to so many others and can be clustered into groups, does that mean that you didn't really have any agency over becoming yourself? Is your ultimate purpose to be so you that you are the aberration in every distribution? But then wouldn't it be just like that matrix thing where being an aberration is just a necessary part of the system and there is no escape of the deterministic nature of this metaverse? Okay. Is there an end to this all? Could there ever be an end to this? There is, I think, a danger in desiring this idealized vision of absolute freedom to be oneself or to be free from society, and I think this manga shows it very well. The presumption that you see others completely leads to a presumption that someone can see you completely. This capacity to know Ding an sich, as we know, is impossible because we are limited by our own bodies, our own interpretations, our own senses. And additionally, we are constantly changing as we interact with the external world. So we can identify this pointlessness to go around looking for that special someone that can see you fully when you yourself aren't and will never be able to attain the full picture of someone. Achieving mutual freedom depends on acknowledging this fact. At least this is what Hegel pertains to explain.
Freedom for Hegel contains certain elements: autonomy, union with other, self-overcoming, and Freigabe, or liberation from the desire to control and possess other. If you haven't realized that you are more than a self-seeking particularity, Your self-consciousness is an I that might lose its freedom the moment it realizes the freedom of the other. Because recognition requires reciprocity, meaning mutual freedom.
That freedom entails letting go of the desire to control others, which is one of the prerequisites, understanding people's autonomy, but also understanding the interdependentness we have, or interconnection. We can see in the final chapters of the manga how Nakoshi obsesses over this need for someone to see his heart and for him to be able to see others through this really cool capacity that he has. In the end, he destroys the object of his desire, hinting the perhaps destructive nature of such a self-seeking individuality that ultimately sees others as obstacles and objects, as means to goals. I also sense this last part of the manga is a bit of a parody of enlightenment and the idea of ego death, as by eliminating his last desire, everyone become him, literally. But in actuality, this enlightened Diogenes version of Nakoshi is portrayed as an out of touch with reality Nakoshi, who will probably end up being under antipsychotic medication and maybe in jail.
Ultimately, you construct who you are as a result of socializing into a society. But at the same time, this society limits you and can become against you becoming who you are and maturing as a person. And the conclusion is a constant inner conflict, inauthenticity, or in a way, an authentic performance. We also come to see the despair Nakoshi portrays in desiring to be seen and to be human, the length he goes to, but with the assumption that the realization of other is possible, and thus attaining himself is also possible. But the end hints that that might not be the case at all. That ideal does not exist. If you shed all the layers, there will be nothing. It's a pointless search that leads nowhere but to disappointment and destruction. And with that, I will finish off this video with a quote from Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground.
So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye!
And how do these wise actors know that man wants a normal, a virtuous choice? What has made them conceive that man must want a rationally advantageous choice? What men want is simply independent choice, whatever that independence may cost and whatever it may lead, and choice, of course. The devil only knows what choice. I suspect, gentlemen, that you are looking at me with compassion. You tell me again that an enlightened and developed man, such in short as the future man will be, cannot consciously desire anything disadvantageous to himself that can be proved mathematically. I thoroughly agree, it can by mathematics, but I repeat for the 100th time. There is one case, one only, when man may consciously, purposely desire what is injurious to himself, what is stupid, very stupid, simply in order to have the right to desire for himself even what is very stupid, and not to be bound by an obligation to desire only what is sensible. Of course, this very stupid thing, this caprice of ours may be, in reality, gentlemen, more advantageous for us than anything else on earth, especially in certain cases. And in particular, it may be more advantageous than any advantage, even when it does us obvious harm and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reason concerning our advantage. For in any circumstances, it preserves for us what is most precious and most important. That is, our personality, our
Individuality.